Welcome to a new episode of Outside the Panels with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to the first Outside the Panels for 2024. I hope everybody had a great new year and a great Christmas break. I am your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and this time around, on our first episode, we've got a fantastic writer artist who has a middle grade book out featuring topics such as fitting in, alienation, anti-Semitism, Alzheimer's, all aimed at middle grade. How can you get so much crammed into one book? Well, let's find out. Let's bring on writer, artist, creator, Alex Schumacher. Alex, Happy New Year, sir.
Happy New Year, Johnny. Thank you for having me on.
You are more than welcome. Oh, man, your book, we joked off screen there that it's like 3,000 pages long. It's not 3,000, but it's a hefty read in a good way.
Yeah.
What was it that made you kind of want to tackle so many of the elements in this book? Because I'm right? You've got how to fit in at school, how to fit in with your family, anti-Semitism, religion, and then you've got some dementia and Alzheimer's thrown in.
Right. Yeah. Sort of, it was informed heavily. It's not memoir per se, but it's heavily informed by two separate experiences of my life that in reality happened, something like 20 years apart. But I was for some reason I was thinking about both of those, which was my joint bar and bat mitzvah with my sister, and when my grandmother did have cognitive decline and Alzheimer's later on. So I just saw this kind of really beautiful symmetry between them. There was this parallel of like a cultural ascent into adulthood paired with, dealing with this very adult thing in your life. And it just seemed almost like a natural fit. So, I had gone through both of those things. And it just seemed like a good pairing.
I think you've kind of hit the nail right on the head there. For when going through the bar mitzvah, it's quite a spiritual growing up from child to man. But the character in the book, he doesn't just go through a spiritual transition, he goes through an emotional transition. And it's when you see that work its way through the pages, honestly, I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, I'll be happy at the point. I just couldn't work out when I got to the end. I actually had to put it down. I had to think about it, and it's just so poignant in so many places and so relevant. Because we've all gone through that middle grade, where either too geeky or too dorky, or there's always somebody cooler than you.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and it was definitely, that coming from that perspective where, it is a book that the protagonist is a Jewish character, but I wanted it to be a character that anybody could relate to, because that's sort of the antithesis of the book, where the character feels very left out and very, challenged in many ways. But if the audience is relating to that, then there's this, kind of shared experience with it. So I wanted it to be that, and not just this thing where people are like, oh, what's pickled herring, what's gefilte fish, it wasn't necessarily like, that's a fun part. A part that I really enjoy honoring and discussing in the book, because it's my culture and my the traditions that I grew up loving, and make me feel connected to my family. So it was absolutely something I wanted to share, but the whole idea is to make it something that any kid could relate to.
And it absolutely works so well. When I was reading the first act, and how the character's looking forward to Saturday with grandma, granddad. We've just gone through Christmas, and we're talking about, my wife and I was like, we're talking about traditions, and my gran used to show me how to make these savory balls, like a sausage, onion stuffing type thing, and to me they're like, they're the best things in the world, and I made my own this year, and and just kind of these kind of memories that come back. I get the some of the elements of the story are personal to you, so the Jewish faith, for example.
Yeah.
But that, in a large way, translates to a person reading it as something that's important to them.
Oh,
You can translate that. Well, okay, so I'm not of Jewish faith, so I have no reference. However, I know what's important to me and what were my family traditions. So
yeah.
the parallel is easily transferable for sure.
Oh, good. Yeah, and that's absolutely what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be something that any kid could see themselves in, and like you said, whether it's the way that they relate to their family, whether that's being part of a culture that isn't necessarily the prevailing culture where they live or grew up. Like you said, you can kind of have that transference of whatever made you feel other. And again, and that's kind of the point of ingress for anybody to relate to Micah and Alana.
So, with all that said, I also think the book does a great job of talking about the Jewish faith and some of the things that go within that without being preachy. So, how did you manage to kind of, because that's a tightrope, isn't it? You want to be serious about what you believe.
Yeah.
It is a story element, but you don't want to come across as, shouting with a megaphone about it. So that's quite a talent for sure.
Good, because I appreciate you saying that, because it certainly, I didn't want it to come off as proselytizing or or doing anything like that. So I think finding the balance was a matter of using Judaism as something that the character finds answers in, or questions, or so it's using Judaism as a way that it affects his decisions and his life, but that's not necessarily the only thing in his life that matters.
No, indeed.
And it's an incredibly important part, but again, like you said, I wanted to present it as as almost as generally as I could, in a way to make it accessible to everybody, and just show that a rabbi to Micah is another authority figure or a leader that he looks up to, and that was the whole point of it. So the Judaism and the traditions, those, like I said, those were important for me to share, but they weren't necessarily the way that the only thing that mattered in Judaism, I guess.
I guess the way I look at it, because I have friends of Jewish faith, and I would bet my bottom dollar that whilst the Judaism is a piece of the story, and there is a lot of humor that you build into that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of humor in Judaism, right? I think you develop that sort of as a defense mechanism, because there really are so many Jews who are humorists or comedians or in that vein, and to some degree I think it's a defense mechanism or a coping mechanism, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I also, because this is going to sound quite odd and a little bit oxymoronic, so I apologize for this. Whilst there are humor elements about what Judaism, how it's portrayed in the book, I also think that it's treated respectfully, so that if you were of a Jewish faith, you would see the humor of that situation. You'd reflect back to when you were learning how to say certain words and do certain things and go, oh yeah, of course, I remember when that happened. I could never do this, that, and the other, So I think we talk about it, Judaism or the religion in this book as kind of being part of it.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It's not the be all and end all of it, for sure.
No, it's the humanism, the humanity behind it. That's what people are going to relate to every time. So when you're showing it, in a way that's not necessarily like kowtowing or blindly following every single word of what they're taught. I felt there was a very, not just human element to that, but like, teenager or preteen kind of defiance about that. And so that's why it comes off, I think, as relatable, because it's not just this thing that's related to Judaism. It's this thing that's related to being a human and being that age. So when I present it like that, instead of being like, this is why Judaism is the best, that presented in a way where it's a part of who he is as a human. Like that's where I think that's what will draw people in, hopefully.
I've said earlier in the show that there's it is a coming of age book. Every piece of review material I've seen on the net about this, the first thing they say, the middle grade coming of age book. I'm like, yeah. For me, it's more than that, and I mean that as a compliment. We've talked about how the character goes through a spiritual and emotional growth. For me, there's a massive perception growth within his worldview. And if I can take 2 minutes to kind of explain what I mean.
Yeah.
At the start of the book, like every kid, he feels that his life is his life and all the other people he knows are just characters in his life.
Yeah.
Yeah? He has no sort of kind of, he doesn't see them as as real as he is. It's his life, and these are members of his life.
Yeah.
And it's not until what happens to his grandmother, that he then realizes that, hold on a second, it's also her life and also his sister's life.
Yeah.
And he comes to this realization that it's them together.
Yeah.
And he kind of has this, instead of just seeing it's his life, he sees like a bigger world. And I think that is probably one of the hardest lessons you get from a middle grader who thinks everything's all about them.
Right.
To the point of that realization, like, holy crap, I'm going to have to do something about something else. Or I'm going to have to do something for someone else.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing is it's, it is sort of a, I don't know, like an unintentional narcissism. I think we have
as kids. Absolutely, you are absolutely right. Definitely.
It doesn't come from like a malevolent place with them. It's just of how you are as a kid. And so there's some loss of that, like you said, when something really serious happens to the grandmother. So it's also this blossoming, like the loss of that kind of self-interest, and also loss,
the short-sightedness, the loss of that short-sightedness.
The loss of that, and the gaining or blossoming of like empathy and compassion, and like you said, the understanding that the other people around you have things that are going on in their lives too. And especially when it's your family or your friends, anybody that you love, you also need to be aware of those things and not just what's going on internally. And so it is a hard lesson to learn. And I think, even by the end of the book, because this isn't a spoiler, but I think even by the end of the book, he's still struggling with that to some degree, because it's not something that happens all at once. But I hope there is some, like you said, I'm glad that growth is noticeable, though.
Massively. And I kind of think, I think, again, you talk about the relatability element of it. I remember the first time I could, as a young teen working, the first time I could afford to get my mum a decent Christmas present, as opposed to that, the $2 or £2 sort of like gimmick from a cheap shop. I went out and bought her a Ghetto, like a music center type thing. Because she didn't have one, and I was like, oh, there you go. The first time I did that, it was kind of like that awakening moment of like, wow, this is it. I've made it. I've changed from being, all about me to actually thinking about other people. So
there's fulfillment in that. I mean, like we as a species are kind of geared towards community and that sharing aspect of community. So there's this great joy and fulfillment you get from doing that for somebody else. And I think Micah does kind of discover that through the book too, and is kind of enjoying that, but by the end, where it's like, oh, I can do things for other people, and it feels just as good, if not better.
Yeah, absolutely. He seems. I don't want to give the game away, but if you look at the reviews online and all the previews and stuff, Alzheimer's and mental decline is in there.
Yeah.
I don't think he looks the happiest he looks in the whole book is in the last few pages.
Perfect.
And that's the bit that gets me, because you want to be happy for his growth, but then you're sad because of the reason.
Yeah.
But then you're happy because he doesn't see it that way. And you're like, Alex, what are you doing to me? What are you doing? Why would you do this?
Already, I really enjoy endings that are hopeful but not necessarily happy.
Oh, great.
There's a distinction to be made between those two, right?
Because so The Empire Strikes Back is your perfect film then. Great.
Yeah. Oh, it's my favorite Star Wars film. I'm one of those. Yeah, absolutely. But I do, and I enjoy when like not everything is tied up in some neat bow, because that's not reality. Like, because any story that you're telling, unless you actually want it to be 3,000 pages, any story that you're telling is just a snippet of a person's life. It's not the whole life. So if you're tying everything up really neatly by the end of that story, then you're kind of doing a disservice to the characters and the audience to some degree, because that's not how life is. Things don't really wrap up, and you can hint at things to come, either both positive or negative. But again, I think that that's one of the biggest life lessons, and that is that you just kind of have to take life as it comes, and you have to find the moments of happiness where you can.
Before we have a look at the book, before we take a break for one of our other shows, I want to talk a little bit about Alzheimer's and about dementia. It does feature in the book.
Yeah.
In my day job, part of what I do is aware. I have a huge awareness of mental health. So it should come to no surprise that when I was reading the book, I got it pegged early doors. I was like, oh, I know what's going on there. And that's not meant as an insult. That's a fact because of my awareness, I suppose.
Yeah.
But it has to be shown early doors to help follow the character's journey with Grandma, because at one point he's denial, then he's so he goes through those kind of stages of loss a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he kind of shrugs it off as a joke at one point.
Yeah. Like,
I believe that that's something that Grandma would do.
Yeah, and the drinking is in the outdoors is a bit of a red herring, but that's fine. Yeah. I once heard it described dementia and Alzheimer's as a bookcase. So imagine, and this is for everyone who has, I guess, no idea what we're talking about. It's quite a layman's way of describing it. So I'll say this now, no offense is meant to anyone who has gone through this at all. But I've heard dementia described as a bookcase, and each shelf is a decade of your life. All right. So the first shelf is 1 to 10, 11 to 20, so on and so forth and so on, right? Now, if your bookcase is anything like mine, if you shake your bookcase, the books at the top will fall before the books at the bottom. So when you suffer something like Alzheimer's and dementia, what's happening is your bookcase is getting shook and books are falling off.
Interesting.
So it's sometimes at random times, which is why random memories disappear, whilst the ones that are at the bottom don't move because they're sturdy. Does that make sense? Is that
no?
I know that's a bit of layman's idea, but you mentioned that you've gone through something. You've gone through this with your own family. Does that sound kind of right? Kind of familiar?
No, it absolutely does, and because it's so interesting that they can't remember what they ordered for lunch 5 minutes ago, but they could remember like their first kiss or their first like road trip, and they could remember the exact like sights and sounds and very vividly. So that's still, like you said, those books are still all perfectly in place somehow. But yeah, there just hits a point in their life, like maybe it goes up to when the dementia started. I mean, I think is typically what happens, and from that point on, everything is either fuzzy or gone. And it's just that the human mind is so, I say fascinating, but maybe that's the wrong word for it, because it's a bittersweet kind of fascination. But yeah, that's always intrigued me. But the bookcase metaphor I think is brilliant. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a really personal question then before we take a break.
Yeah.
How hard was it kind of reliving those sort of aspects? Because Grandma's journey is absolutely heartfelt all the way through. This book is chock full of emotion from page 1 to the last page.
Oh, good.
That's me reading it.
Yeah.
You drawing it and writing it, it must have an impact on you, man.
I would tell my wife, there were some days I would literally be at my drafting table, just either welling up or bawling from, drawing this thing that's based on a very specific memory of when she was suffering from that. And, any kind of grief, or, I'm a true believer in, and you don't ever get over that. You learn to live with it. So the pain becomes less intense, the memories become less vivid, and it's not that you forget about it, but you've learned how to live with it.
Yeah.
So then when you're doing something like this, it's this weird excavation of those memories and those feelings, and suddenly they're all right back at the surface.
It's like you're picking the scab off a wound.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you've experienced this. So you hear a song, right? And it's an emotional song that you love, that moves you, but you're listening to it, and that's one experience. The moment you start singing it, your eyes well up, your face flushes. It's a completely different experience. And that's kind of the way that I can relate that is, once you start actually experiencing that memory again, which is what the singing is as opposed to the listening, I think. All those emotions are just bubble right back up.
It's very brave to take on something so heartfelt. I tip my hat to you, sir.
That's really good. I appreciate you saying that.
Cool. You're more than welcome. Credit where credit is due. Cool. Right, on a lighter note, let's take an advert for one of our other shows. Right, these guys are coming up later this week with their first show of the year, so might as well check it out. Another year's gone on. That means they are another year older. Check them out.
Do you want to find out what makes the professor do his happy dance? Check out the Old Timers Comic Book Show, only on the UCPN.
That's right. The Old Timers Comic Book Show.
Me, I was enjoying that.
Sorry, man. The Old Timers Comic Book Show, where the hosts aren't old, but the comics most certainly are. As I said, another year has gone by, so that 25-year bracket now includes that far distant past of 1999.
Oh boy.
Doesn't seem 25 years ago since that was around, let me tell you.
10 years ago.
Yeah, that was yesterday, right? Right, we're going to take a look at some of the pages of the book you were kindly sent along. So there we go. We've used the part of the cover for our backdrop there. So these are our heroes and heroines in the background there. Yep. Brother, sister.
Micah and Alana.
There you go. See? It's like you wrote the book. How cool.
Almost.
Let's see if we can get to where I need to be. Why has that happened? Oh, the troubles of technology.
Yeah, I know. It's always meant to make our lives easier, and it rarely does.
No, it doesn't barely make it at all. Let's see. Where's my...
I mean, my wife would tell you I'm a Luddite, but I don't mind technology. Just...
Oh, I know why. Give me 2 seconds. I know why. I know what I've done. I'm an absolute idiot. Is what I've done. Where are we at?
Oh, did you open the cover image?
Yeah, I opened the cover image like a moron. What can I say?
Well, it probably would have been better if I sent it in the PDF. So maybe
I have it. Just give me 2 seconds. I apologize. I told you it's the first one back since since God knows when. So
we're all shaking off the rust still.
True that. We'll get that. Well, at least now you know.
In that grace period. The New Year grace period.
Yeah, I hope so, because I've got more of these to do next week. There we go. Here we go. At the stage, boom, there it is.
There we go.
Here he is. There, look at that. I've got to ask a question about the art, all right? Because we've talked in the first half of the show about how there's lots of serious things going on. And we talked about the humor, we talked about the emotion element. Taking a cartoon comic strip style over a comic book style, was that an intentional choice from yourself to try and kind of add a sense of levity to some of the situations?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was actually a choice I made, a number of years ago, because I had been really earlier in my career, I had been trying for kind of a, Mike Mignola, darker vibe like that. And, at some point I realized I was just never going to achieve that, which is fine. Not everybody can. And so I was writing even more serious or sort of more adult oriented material. And so this idea of presenting it in more of a cartoonish format or with cartoonish artwork, I think it does dampen the heaviness a little bit. It takes some of the weight off when you're reading. There's that juxtaposition that I think works really well, and especially since it's for kind of aimed squarely at a younger demographic this time around. I felt it needed to be a little lighter as far as the artwork goes.
I think the artwork helps kind of demonstrate the humor as being kind of humorous. It also helps with some of the serious things that goes on. It gets a little bit weird, middle third a little bit, gets a little bit, a little bit woo out there. But there's a reason. There is a reason for that, of course. I'm not going to spoil it. Go buy the book.
Yeah.
So,
that's the end result. Yeah. Just.
I think. I mean, we've all been in this situation out with our families and and so on. It's so well observed, and that's what kind of I think impresses me. The cartoon element, the comic strip element, I get because there has to be a sort of levity. It can't be serious on top of serious on top of serious.
Yeah, and then really dark, foreboding artwork.
Yeah, exactly right.
Away from this depressed necessarily.
I also think it helps with that relatability we talked about early on, didn't we?
Yeah.
We talked about how we've all been in that situation where somebody's had maybe a tipple too many.
Yeah.
We all have our own insecurities as Micah goes through his.
And embarrassments and trials and triumphs and failures. Yeah, all that. Yeah. It's all in there.
I mean,
also, I want to shout out to the colorist, Alan Furtz, and he did all the color for this book, and he did just a spectacular job.
Definitely. It absolutely. I'm trying to think of what it reminded. It didn't remind me of anything like Bam straight away. You know what I mean? No, sometimes I see something. It's like Calvin and Hobbes, or it's like Peanuts, or it's But I don't know. It's just so original and so enjoyable. We talked about the emotions. You've got him trying to get things right. You've got him, his sister trying to be all like, oh well, and then the rabbi being like, oh, don't worry, I've heard worse, and then all of a sudden, no, I haven't. It's got all these things kind of play through. You mentioned
the great thing about the format. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go for it.
That's kind of the great thing about the format of graphic novels is you can do that, right? Whereas in prose, I would kind of have to describe the shift in tone or demeanor of the rabbi somehow. Whereas with the graphic novel format, I can just show it, and it's a little more cinematic in that way, which is a lot of fun to play around with too.
Which do you find easier? Do you find it easier to write, or do you find it easier to draw, or is it more of you get an idea, put it on paper, and then just go from there?
I find it much easier and honestly more enjoyable to write. Personally, I once heard Art Spiegelman describe himself as a writer who can draw, and I kind of relate to that very heavily. And it's not a pretension thing where I feel as though calling myself a writer is more respectable or something, or venerable in some way.
Yeah.
It's just that I think I'm better at it than I am at drawing, and I think that came from a very genuine place when Art Spiegelman said it. And I think both of us wish we could draw better. Essentially, is what it comes down to. But I've developed a style that I think works very well with my writing. So I'm happy with the artwork, and it's not something that I'm necessarily embarrassed or anything to put.
I wouldn't be. It's funny because you mentioned Mike Mignola earlier, and I mentioned Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts, probably two of the most iconic comic strips out there in the world. There's like 57 varieties, man. So, you know, in my head, there's room on the rack for all sorts of stuff.
Absolutely.
And the amount of different books I see, from Jim Lee style art, the dynamic superhero poses, to stuff like Sandman that's like way out there, to cartoony stuff, to stuff that's got more thigh highs than a stripper at a stripper party. You know, you know what I'm saying? I get to see it all.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody should be embarrassed about their talent. You've got a strength and a style that means that you can tell the stories that you want to tell.
Yeah.
And how is that not a good thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for saying that, because that's, you know, about 10 years ago, I think I realized that, where, you know, the realization that I wasn't going to be able to approximate anything that Mike Mignola does isn't a bad thing. It was a liberating thing, where I can then go, okay, well, all these books that I've loved, you know, from the Fantagraphics catalog, Drawn and Quarterly, you know, those types of indie artists that were big in the 90s when I was kind of honing my craft. My objective was then to find my style. Perfect. And so when I found a style that I think suited me and that people, you know, kind of had a reaction to, that was really satisfying. It was vindicating in a way, and so I'm very pleased with how it came out.
If I was an artist and I doodle, as everyone on the show knows I doodle, if I was an artist, I would look for a reaction. I wouldn't want to be one of those people who someone looks at my art and goes, "Oh yes, house style next." Oh, house style next.
Right.
You know, I'd want to find my own voice, as it were, my own style. If some people love it, great, woo, party hardy. If people hate it, so what?
Yeah, good, bad, or ugly. If people like what I do, that's great. Or if they hate what I do, that's okay too, because I can still say that it's mine.
Perfect.
And so, yeah, I think that's something that, as an artist, there's not much more you can hope to achieve than that feeling.
No, I agree. The book works well across the board. The writing is spot on. The art has that cartoony appeal. Some of the situations, they're very well observed, which helps to that relatability element. You know, I think this is an absolute peach of a book.
Oh, thank you so much.
You know, I absolutely enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to anyone who feels a little different and a little bit pressured by life, and that's whatever that pressure may be. You know, it could be
all over. It comes from family. It comes from society. It comes from being online. You know, it's a lot all the time. And when you're, you know, a 12-year-old still trying to figure out who you are, you know, that can feel like the sky is falling sometimes.
Definitely. And then especially if there feels like a lack of support. You know, Mika has this problem with these sisters being like so cool and so trendy. And there's a bit that absolutely hits me from my experiences when he says when she's not on the bus, he's nobody. Nobody spots him.
Yeah.
And I was like, that was me.
Yeah.
That was me on the school bus. You know, if my popular brother wasn't there, you know, no one's talking to me anytime soon.
And I think that's a very, I think that's probably a more relatable experience, I think, than the popular kids.
Definitely,
right?
definitely.
And there's anything wrong with being popular if that was your experience.
No.
But I think the larger, but more relatable experience is definitely the kids who felt outside of that, or uncool, or
I think it was. I've often thought in the past it's harder to be popular than it is to be unpopular.
Oh, I'm sure it is. It feels like a lot of work.
And very much like Mika in this book, I think I got to about 14, 15. And something happened. I was like, you know what? I'm all right. I'm all right with my place in the playground. I get it. Right? Yeah. I'm not quite sporty to join the jocks, and I'm not quite academic enough to join the nerds. So I'll just be me. And that's all I can be. And that's it. And once you have that kind of epiphany moment, you know, life starts to get a little bit better.
It does, and then you find the other ones, like 2 or 3 other kids feel the same as you do, and then you have friends, and it's you kind of move into that in high school, but middle school always seems to be that sort of sticky wicket where you're not really sure which way it's going to go yet.
Yeah, true. Gotta have faith.
Yeah.
Right, excellent. Okay, so Alex, you've got some socials going on. Like when I say socials, you've got more socials than pages in your book. I'm joking.
Almost. It's a lot to manage.
All right, so there we go. You've got your Twitter on there. We follow each other on Twitter. Lots of information on there. Really cool stuff. If you're on Facebook, there it is, alex.schumacher.23. 23 is one of my family's lucky numbers. Don't know.
Nice. My birthday.
Yay! And it just keeps happening. Keeps popping up. It's crazy. And of course, we've got Insta, and the new one, bsky.app, is on there as well. Perfecto. You have your own website.
I do, which is not updated quite as much as I'd like it to be, but I'm trying to be better about that this year. That was maybe my one resolution, if you want to call it.
My New Year's resolution this year is to learn how to play the guitar.
Well, hey, talk to me afterward. We could do some virtual lessons.
I will say this: it's been my New Year's resolution for the last 30 years, but anyway.
Old.
The reason why your website's not updated is because you're on 14 different types of social media.
That's true. It's a job into itself.
The book is due out on, let me get my date, it is the 12th of March this year. Now, you can see loads of reviews and previews on the website, However, the details here on this screen are right now, these are your international standard book numbers, all right? So if you want to order this book, and I suggest you want to order this book, go to your nearest bookstore, give them these numbers, and they will be able to pre-order it in for you. There you go. Also, check out the website. You should be able to buy it from there as well, I'd assume, when it comes out.
Most likely.
Most likely. If not,
I can get my assistant in order, who's asleep on the dog bed behind me currently. So we'll see.
We'll leave them up for a while. So give me the last 60 seconds. I normally say 30, but there's a lot going on in this book. Yeah. Why should people go out and buy this book? Why should they go and check out Effects of the Pickled Herring?
Because I certainly wish there was a book like this when I was a kid, and I know that it seems like a sort of cookie cutter answer, but that's the truth. I think that's why writers write, is they write books into the world that they want to see. And again, like we've said during our chat, I think it is relatable for anybody who feels outside of normal, whatever that is, feel like they don't fit in, feel like they don't have a community, but maybe can find that in something, which is partly what Mike is doing by, getting serious about his bar mitzvah and things like that. So for anybody who's looking for community, feels like they're on the outside, you're not alone, buy my book and you'll see. Cool.
Perfect. What a great way of ending that. There's the ISBNs again. Make a note of it. Dead simple. Dead easy to find. Alex, you've been an absolute blast, my friend. Absolute blast. Thank you so much for spending time to hang out with me and talk about the book.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, man. Honestly, you know what? It's a joy. When I see a book this good, that has this much impact when I read it, I'm like, right. Let's go. Let's get talking.
To hear that, it really does. I appreciate you saying that.
Absolutely. And I think that shows when I do these pods. It's like, the book is fantastic.
Thank you.
Check it out. You need to check it out. All right, Alex, thank you so much. For everyone else, don't forget to check out the UCPN for all your favorite shows. You saw the trailer for it earlier, the Old Timers Comic Book Show. And if you like your comics Marvel, the No Price Podcast is there to help you with everything that's MCU, Marvel Comics, and Disney Plus. And you DC heads are not forgotten with the Definitive Crusade. There you go. What more could you want? There you go. Alex, you've been an absolute blast, sir. The book's great. I hope it does fantastic.
Thanks so much, Johnny. It's been a pleasure.
You're more than welcome. I have been your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes. And as always, adios.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.shop, all about comic pop culture.